Okay, so I became interested in architecture when I was actually very, very young. My mom was a painter. I have one uncle who's a sculptor. My other uncle's a photographer. There's just a lot of conversation about aesthetics. I've been born in New York, and I grew up in Connecticut, and I spent most of my life living in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. In New York, you have tenements, tall buildings, and townhouses. That's kind of about it. But then I came to LA, and I was just baffled by the strangeness and the randomness of architecture here. If you go to Florence, you go to Paris, you go to Rome, New York, San Francisco, London, like the great architecture, everybody knows about it, and it's kind of in the center of the city. Whereas LA, the great architecture is hidden, and it's weird, and that's what led me to start my weird architecture blog. My uncle, he gave me my first camera when I was 10 years old. So I've actually been doing photography for as long as I've been doing music, but photography was always just kind of like a fun hobby. In a very dilettantish way, I've always wanted to be an architectural photographer. The thing is, I don't think I'm very good at it, but that in a way in LA sort of serves the subject matter. You know, like if I was really trying to be precious as a photographer, I wouldn't be able to document a lot of the weird stuff that I'm able to document. Ennis House, probably the most iconic piece of LA residential architecture. It was built by Frank Lloyd Wright in the 20s. It's the strangest house I've ever seen in my entire life. It's massive, and it looks like an Incan spaceship or a Mayan spaceship from 100,000 years ago. Whenever people come to visit me in LA, I always drive them by it, and the response is always exactly the same. Just this simple sort of like disbelief. It's this odd church. It's purple, lavender-hued, mid-century Seventh-day Adventist cathedral, and there's a lot that's wrong about it. Like it's just a little bit too small. It doesn't really make any sense the way it sits on the street and the way it presents itself. A lot of city planners and architects would think it just looks like a strange concrete bunker, but there's a weird beauty to it. Well, Watts Towers in South Central, it's a part of LA that most people never go to. It's one of the things I love about LA is it makes no sense to me. You know, when you see St. Peter's, the Duomo in Milan, or even like the Empire State Building, like they're amazing, but they're also not dissimilar from a vernacular perspective from the buildings around them. And then you see things like Watts Towers and you're like, it's just completely arbitrary and amazing. Villa Carlotta is this amazing apartment building. It's so dark and gothic and surrounded by big tropical plants. It's kind of like a smaller version of what the Chelsea Hotel used to be, where you have no idea who's living there. The story was that Howard Hughes had built it for one of his mistresses. I don't fully believe that because it's way too big for one mistress to live there. LA people love buildings and they always have stories about them. You know, and no one's ever too concerned about whether the stories are actually historically accurate, as long as they're interesting. Gamble House it's in Pasadena. In the early 20th century in LA, there was a thing called the arts and crafts movement, sort of Japanese inspired, but also kind of traditional American architectural vernacular as well. Normally they're quite modest. 2 bedrooms, maybe 3 bedrooms, little porch, very simple, very sort of American looking. And the Gamble House is one of these small houses that's been fed steroids. It's like the form of a small house expanded to a mansion, and it's beautiful, but it also seems like there's something wrong with it. You know, like I had a conversation years ago with a friend of mine who's an architect, and I forget what building we were talking about, but he was maligning this building with very strict architectural criteria. And my response was, yeah, but it looks cool and people live there and they watch TV with their kids, you know. And at the same, because there has to be sort of like a practical utility to architecture as well.